try to give you as much as I possibly can. The last time we talked about the settlement of America and what took place on the East Coast and on the West Coast. There was quite a little bit of difference between the East and the West Coast as far as the settlement goes. On the West Coast, the Spaniards, Spain came here from the Catholic Church, and basically what did they do on the West Coast?
They ground up the Indians, used them for slaves.
That's right. They killed them or they became slaves. They had a choice. Either you're a slave or you're dead. On the East Coast now, what happened?
A little bit of religion.
A little more freedom over there. We have England that tolerates just a little bit more. They made treaties, contracts with a people on the East Coast that were somewhat recognized as human beings, the American Indians, and they would make treaties. Of course, they broke the treaties almost as fast as they made them. But the American Indians said for a long time that they were better off under England than they ever were under America, the United States of America, because England kept the treaties stronger than what America has. And America was a very young country at that time. You have to remember, and we're talking about church history, but we're also talking about politics. And the evolution, I don't believe in evolution, so to speak, but I believe in the evolution of things as things just slowly roll and end up the way they are. There was many historians have said in the past that a man that does not study history is a fool and bound to repeat history again and again. That has been done so many times. The East Coast did allow, they try to make princes and kings out of the Indians. You've heard of Indian princesses and Indian princes and stuff. There was no such thing among the people. They believed in absolute freedom and democracy among the tribes. Nobody was really a leader. They were looked upon men as leaders that were brave and honest. And if you didn't remain brave and honest, you didn't remain a leader. That would put out almost every politician in this country. They would be out the door. They would be gone. As far as Indians, we knew better than that. A man had to prove himself daily, or he was not one of our leaders, and nobody could speak for the people at all. The people spoke for themselves. And that's the way it was. So when Europe came over here, and they were not used to dealing with a democracy like was at stake here in this country, the people here there was revolution among the American Indian tribes because somebody was taken to Washington, D.C. or whatever, or to some princes or some representative from England or Spain or France or wherever, and they were given medals and they were treated as a representative of the people, and they weren't. Nobody could sign a treaty for anybody else. That was up to every person. Of course, that was done. And as that was being done, the government here was being set up like it was in Europe. In Spain, on the West Coast, of course, there was no freedom here. The Catholic Church only knew one thing: kill and subdue. And that's what was done here on the West Coast. Kill and subdue. And that's exactly what they did to the native people here. And they established a mission. There was no religious freedom whatsoever here on this coast. On the East Coast, and as they came inward, surprisingly, most of the people landed there from Europe and not on this coast over here. And they landed over there and they started going, inland, and a lot of the people ran away and became mountain men. They liked the freedom that they found here that they have never known anyplace else. There was a freedom here that a man could go out and kill a rabbit or a deer or a bear or an elk or whatever, and he wasn't going to go to jail for killing the king's meat. In Europe, you didn't do that. It wasn't done. Kings owned everything. you were either a royalty over there or you were a peon, just literally a serf or a slave in an area. And it was that way also religiously. The state church there, whatever you were, whether you were in Germany or wherever you were, whatever the state church there was, that's what you were. You didn't have any freedom. In England, we know that there was quite enough people there when Henry VIII split, literally took over all the churches, the Roman churches in England, and said, now that you're Church of England, and I am the Pope. That was quite a change. It was not a religious. It was not done as reforming the Catholic Church. All he wanted to do was have the freedom to what? Get a divorce. That was all. And the Pope didn't give him that freedom. The popes, remember, the popes had control over all of the areas where they superintended. And if a prince wanted to get married to a princess or a princess to a prince, they had to get his permission. Or else they weren't even looked upon as being married. You didn't have a marriage unless it was condoned by the universal Catholic Church. See, she claimed universal authority over all people. And they would today, if they had the power. They would today if they had the power. Now, when the Spanish Armada was finally destroyed by Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's daughter, under Anne Boleyn, and Sir Francis Drake, when they finally took the power of the sea away from Spain, it didn't completely stop Spain. They went into different areas and started going. England took part. That's how India was colonized and everything, because England became the mistress of the sea at that period of time. And this is in the 1500s now. Remember, this is a long time ago. This is about 500 years ago, and we're still having problems today in those areas in Africa and in India and all of the eastern countries, because the Catholic Church and the Church of England wanted to have as much control as they could. At one time, the Church of England or Great Britain said that the sun never set on the English Empire. Remember that? Remember when you went to school? The sun never set on the English Empire. Well, when did that begin? After Henry VIII's daughter with the Spanish Armada. And she started going out and colonizing, much the same as Spain did, but not with the viciousness. I would have rather been a peon under England than I would have Spain, because there was no freedom in the Catholic Church. And if you go down in the South American countries and Central American countries, you still have the same amount of power. And why do you think that the communist dictators that get involved down there, why do they have to kick out the Catholic Church? Because they want control, and where Catholicism is, she has control. Okay? Now, as we come inland from the East Coast, basically it wasn't colonized from the West Coast, but from the East Coast now. Remember, it probably would have been a lot easier to go from the West Coast to the East Coast, but they were over there on the East Coast now. All right? Spain was over here, coming up from South America all the way up. Now, I'm going to throw this in here just for free. This is free. It doesn't cost you a dime. Do you know that when Spain took back food to Europe, Europe was absolutely starving to death, by the way. I don't know if you know that. All Europe had was grain. How many of you ever read in your Bible where the King James Version said that Jesus and his disciples went out in the field plucking ears of corn and eating them? There wasn't any corn over there. The only corn there was in the world was over here in America. There was no potatoes, no beans, no carrots, none of these crops that are so readily, the watermelon, the cantaloupes, all of those things were here on this country. This is where so much, the turkeys came from here. There weren't any turkeys in Europe. Okay? All of that food stuff came from here. Now, Europe, the major part of Europe did not want to have anything to do with any crop that grew underground. That was demeaning of them. That was not a good crop. And so when Columbus took back potatoes and peanuts and such as that, they wouldn't have them, except for those dumb Irishmen. They wanted the potatoes. We have the Irish potatoes. And how many of you thought that potatoes were always in Ireland? All right, they came from here. All right. Then when they had the potato blight in Ireland, there was quite a little bit. But guess what the Irish would have been eating if there wasn't for the American potato? They would have starved to death. Europe would just, there was wars and famine all over Europe, up and down. They were deforesting the area, just absolutely fighting, and famine and hunger was all over. When they went back to Europe from the Americas, they came to America. Remember why Columbus came over here? He was wanting a shorter route to India, wasn't he? All right. He was trying to go to India. Well, he ended up in the Americas. And he went over here and started gathering up all this food and, of course, all the gold that he could get. You know, that was, remember how they loaded the ships. When they left Europe, England, Spain, Italy, wherever they left from, they were the bottom of the ship, so they would stay upright, was loaded with rocks and big stones. And as they loaded the ship, they threw those stones out over here and started loading it back up with goods and gold and silver. That's why those big Spanish galleons were just loaded down, and they discovered some of them off the Florida coast and so on and so forth, and they were just loaded with silver and gold. This is where they got it, was over here. Well, as people were coming here, Baptists started coming to America, and religion started coming to America, European religion. The American Indians always did worship God in a very primitive way, a very primitive, simple worship. They believed in God. They prayed with every meal. They never ate everything. I mean, even when they're hungry, they always left something behind to give to the animals and share. What they were taught and what they practiced at that time was what God had taught and enlightened mankind with when He divided the earth. That's what they had. Here, that there was not the disease that there was in Europe, because there wasn't the greed here that there was in Europe. You'll find down in Central America and South America, you'll find some Indian people that their idea of a commune living or a civil living or society was that much like the Egyptians with the pyramids and so on. You'll see over there. And there was slave labor and human sacrifice and things down there, as there was in Egypt. If you'll take your globe and pull it apart, you'll see that that's where they came from, also, was from that area. And that's, if you look at your globe, the earth at one time before God divided the earth, running around a whole lot of things down your throat for a short period of time. But the earth at one time was water, in and out of water, and earth. All right? And when God divided and split the continents, okay, this was called Gondwana by the scientists now, but they know that the earth was all water on one side and all earth on the other side. God divided the world. They call it the continental drift theory. But these different peoples populated the earth. All right? And God divided the earth, and there was great earthquakes. In the period of time when the earth was shifting and there were so many earthquakes and things, you're not going to find too many brick and stone buildings during that period of time. Afterwards, but not during that time. They lived basically in nomadic lives. And what had God told Noah to do? What was the command that He gave to him? Spread out and populate. Do not build great cities. Spread out, populate, depend upon me every day, and I will feed you. And live a nomadic life. and where you find there was the most freedom and most health, where people did that. And cities, when you get a lot of people together, first of all, you have crime. Not only do you have crime because somebody's trying to jerk somebody around all the time, but you also have disease. Disease. And that's exactly what was happening to Europe. That's why Europe was devastated so much and so many times. Disease, famine, hunger, all the things that were going on over here. The people over there were living, an old man was 25 and 30 years old. You have to realize that, and a woman. Old people were 25 and 30. A 40-year-old man was ancient. A few people lived longer, but not a lot. By the majority, it wasn't, because they usually died of something. A lot of things that killed people back in those things was their teeth rotted and poisoned their systems. And they had pericardial infections and things with the heart, and pretty soon they died by the time your teeth start rotting. All right? And that usually happens in your pointy stuff. Okay, so you know why they grow. Over here in America, they have records of people living 100 and 120 years. Why? Because they weren't crammed all together. You go down in Central and South America, you've got the same problem down there that they had in Europe. Okay? Because they were living like that. With the commands of God come promises. Don't they? The Word of God is scientifically, medically, totally accurate and correct. And when God gives you a command for some purpose, we may not understand it in this millennia, but I can guarantee you that it is truth and scientifically accurate, and there's a reason behind it. We know so much of that today. Well, okay, we got the world split and divided and populated from different people. Now we got the Europeans coming to America, bringing religion over here. And the religious systems that came over here in the beginning were nothing but a continuation. They were subsidiaries of kings. It was just like some area, some city in Europe was under a certain sovereign. And when they came over here, they stick their flag in the ground. You know, what did we do when we went to the moon? Stuck the flag in the ground, right off the bat. Act like another Christopher Columbus or somebody. All right? Whose moon was that anyway? Huh? It's God's moon. Go up there and claim something God made. It's His moon. All of this land is His land. It isn't our land. But all they understood in Europe was to control. And any religion you had was controlled by the state of that empire. Okay? And every state that was established in America had a state religion. There was no religious freedom in this country. Finally, we talked about Roger Williams and Dr. John Clark. Roger Williams and John Clark worked together in Newport and can't think of the other one. Rhode Island, anyway. Providence and Newport, Rhode Island. One established a church in one area, and the other helped establish a church in the other area. Roger Williams went back to Europe with John Clark, and they both begged the king to give them a right to establish a free colony in Rhode Island under England, or they would have a religious freedom. They said, this is an experiment. See what will happen. People will absolutely throng to the area, and you'll get a lot of taxes, because they will pay to live in an area where there's religious freedom. Well, it took, Roger Williams came back to the country, back over here to America. He didn't stay over there by about 3 or 4 years. John Clark stayed 12 years beating on the king's doorstep until they finally gave him a writ, a declaration that he could come over here and establish colonies. Well, when he got back, they established the colonies. Dr. John Clark established the first religiously free colony and the first church in America that was absolutely free in 1638. Roger Williams established one in 1639. But he wasn't really sound in what he believed, and he left it, and it floundered, went on, and then it emerged again later on. You will read all kinds of stuff in church histories telling you that he was the first Baptist in America and everything, but if you read one book, maybe you'll believe that. A historian is very poor that has one book on the shelf. Learn to read from many different aspects. Learn to read from many history books and weed out what is truth and what isn't truth. All right, that's something that is. History is not as scientific as mathematics. You have to do a lot of digging, and you have to read between the lines so much to understand what's going on. Because when history is written by a Lutheran, guess what standpoint you're going to hear it from? A Lutheran standpoint. If it's written by a Catholic, it's going to be from a Catholic. Whatever, that's what it's going to be written by. And you've got to take the derogatory remarks about other religions, especially us, and try to figure out where they're coming from. And you have to line up all those derogatory remarks, and you have to figure out what's true and what isn't true. What did they actually practice? Remember I read to you here a few months ago the Paulician statement out of John Lawrence von Mosheim's Ecclesiastical History of the Christian Church from the time of Christ until he lived. That my volume of that was printed in 1798. That's a long time ago. Pretty old book. Well, those churches were established in America. And as those mountain men went inland, guess who one of the most famous? Brother Roger made a mistake this morning when he was talking about Davy Crockett, and he called him Daniel Boone. Remember? I think the second service. Well, and he corrected it quickly. But did you know that Daniel Boone's brother was a missionary, a Baptist missionary? His name was Squire Boone. And as Daniel Boone was going out there chopping and the trail blazing, old Squire Boone was going out there and establishing churches and preaching. How many of you knew that? All right. He was a preacher, a Baptist preacher in his time. There was John Gano in the early part of the history of America. There was the first association of churches established in America was established in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Association. And one of the first, and that was 1707. Okay? Am I doing all right for ad living? That's how you put the stuff together. John Gano was a missionary that went out from that church. He baptized General George Washington. And he was a missionary in the Revolutionary War, sent out by the Philadelphia Association. The Philadelphia Association sent out missionaries, and they established another association called the Sandy Creek Association. There was a Welsh Tract Association. There was a church from Wales, came all the way over here, lock, stock, and barrel, and pastor and all, and members came over to America and established a church called the Welsh Tract Church in America. All right?
Can I mention something? What are the Huguenots?
Huguenots?
Yeah, they were in Virginia, weren't they?
Yes, they were a group of people there wanting religious freedom. So many people came from Europe wanting religious and physical freedom. And you know what they would do? They would hide out for the high woods and go out and get away from everybody. Abraham Lincoln's father says, when you can see your neighbor's smoke from his chimney, you're too close. You know why? Because people would start conglomeration, and when you got neighbors, what do you have to do? You have to deal with neighbors. They didn't want to have to deal with neighbors. As simple as that. They wanted a little bit of security with neighbors around, but they wanted them far off. As many miles between them as they could. You can't even imagine that in American society today. When I was renting out our property out there where we live, we rented out that little house. I had several women call out there and wanted to rent the house, and I told them we were out in the country. And they said, "Oh no!" They said, "I would be scared to death out there." And I said, Isn't it terrible living in the country like this? Aren't you scared? I said, I'd be scared in the city. Give me a little freedom and hang out here. That if somebody comes and banging around, I hear some noise in my yard, I know it's not supposed to be out there at night time. You hear people killing each other here in the city. But they wanted elbow room when they came to America, because that elbow room typified freedom. And I want to tell you something also. A lot of the people that came to America were criminals. Exiled out of Europe. Criminals. Remember, I.K. Krall's telling them, how many of you people can trace your descendants back to the Mayflower? And they stuck their hands up. He said, you might not all be so proud about that. He said, because the biggest part of them are criminals. They had a few of them came over there for religious freedom, but the rest of them were criminals. Murderers and highwaymen and people that were running from their debts. How was Australia colonized?
The same way.
By criminal. It was criminal. It was a detention colony. I have a good friend. I don't know where he is now in the world. I think he's in Australia or Fiji Islands or someplace over there. Probably preaching among the people somewhere. He said that people in Australia trace their family histories back to the convicts. And he sang many songs of the convicts that the convicts sang when they came to there and asking for freedom. And it was such a wild country that only the bravest of the brave would escape and run out into the outback. They stayed in those work colonies over there. Well, that's what happened in America too. A lot of them, a lot of these establishments here in this country, and the early establishments, were established as honor farms or work farms, or what they call the old convict labor, where they would go in and establish and build forts and stuff.
Jim,
Yeah.
I got to run an errand.
Okay.
I may
Good
not
to
be
see you.
back.
Brother Rob, is this helping in your history? Did they teach you this at school? Well, I'll tell you what, I didn't learn it in school either. Not all of it anyway. Some of it I learned in political science and economics and a little bit of everything, and from my teachers and just from learning in life. And knowing the other side of the coin, because I'm Native American. I know what happened to us. I know what happened to my people. You hear history as it's written in schools, U.S. government history, that's written very biased. Very biased, written in schools. But when your people lived, the other side of the coin is a lot different. We are the other side of the coin as Baptists down through the ages. We were persecuted and treated as criminals all the way down through the ages. And so much of Baptist history is being rewritten by people today. How many of you ever heard of John Smith? S-M-Y-T-H. He was born around 1600, or lived about the turn of this into the 1600s. He was in England and in Holland, and through that area, he many historians say that he was the father of the organized Baptist church. In all reality, John Smith was never a real Baptist. But I've taught Greek from grammars for over 30 years. And I finally decided to write my own grammar, because all of them were such a mess, except for A.T. Robertson's, and it's so big that you couldn't synthesize it down. So I wrote my own, because just because somebody writes something in a book in printed form, it is not truth. Not even in the science of grammar. And just because somebody writes something down in a book doesn't mean it's black and white truth. As simple as that. Even in the courts today, the decisions that are made don't always, maybe never, deal with truth. All right? So when you read a book, read the first most important thing to read a history book and study history is to read about the author and read the preface to the book and where he's coming from. All right? And I've told you in the class before that the reason why I brought John T. Christian's books to you as a textbook for you to study from, I haven't taught from it long. I've taken this book and I have ad-libbed from it for 16 weeks now. Different things in here. And Moshians and Neanders and Armitage history, all of the histories that I study, which are hundreds. But this is one of the most honest historians that I have ever, and he is a real bona fide historian. So many people that write books today that are historians are not really historians. They want to write history to accommodate them and their beliefs. Baptist churches have changed so much in the last 100 years. It's a shame. Shame on us. That's all I can say. Shame on our history that we have denied our forefathers in so many areas and have just wrote them off as part of the Protestant Revolution. Because when you write that off, then what do? You nullify the promises that Jesus Christ made to his church. And he said that it will be here always until the end of this age. You know, why did I start off in the Bible to begin church history? Because we have to have the right foundation in church history.
Well, in America, they have the Louisiana Purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the Roman Empire?
Well,
Through France?
France, they would claim areas. France claimed areas. Great Britain claimed areas.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, that was coming from the East Coast, remember?
Yeah.
All right. And the Americans purchased that. Well, we purchased Alaska from the Russians.
Yeah.
What business do the Russians have owning Alaska?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how crazy. In all reality.
Well,
And we have... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the Spanish came up into Santa Fe many years before that.
Mm-hmm. They came all the way across the plains, devastating from one end of this country across what is called the State Plain, killing and robbing and stealing in the name of the Pope. Europe, at least when they came in the East Coast, there was some similitude of a little honesty and the recognition of the people that they came to, even though they did claim it. And we wouldn't have a United States of America if it wasn't for the Iroquois Confederation of Faith. Purple Turtle and some of the great leaders back in that period of time, they told those Englishmen that were coming over here, and Penn, Pennsylvania, all right, told those people, why do you have to fool around with them guys over there in Europe? Establish your own, you call it kingdom? Establish your own free country over here. We'll let you do it. We won't bother you if you don't mess with us. Just say we're free. Just say you're free and just cut loose some of those people over there and write up a constitution. So when they did that, Thomas Jefferson, he went to Baptist churches and he was very familiar with the Iroquois Confederation of Faith, and it starts out, we the people. We the people. If that was been in Europe, what would it have said? We the king. Read the preface to the King James Version. Your Majesty, highest conqueror, overseer of all of the land. It sure wouldn't have said we the people. That is an Indian term, we the people. My daughter's name is Dakota. Her name means a human being, one of the human beings. That's what her name simply means. It means one of the human beings, one of the human race, one of the race of the human beings, one of the tribe of the Sioux people. All right? I used a very bad term for Sioux to use. Sioux is a Ojibwe and French term, and we hear about the Sioux Nation and all of that. The word Sioux means cutthroat. It means, in sign language, it's that. That's what it means. It means cutthroat. Because the Sioux stood hard against the population of their country. And they were afraid of them. So they called them Sioux or cutthroats. The name for the Sioux people was Dakota, Lakota, and Dakota, or Nakota. And all of those means one of these. All of that means is one of the human beings, one of our nation, one of our people. That's what that name means. That was our name, and most of the Indian titles for their own people meant one of our race, one of our people, one of the human beings, one whom God has created and placed here in this land to take care of God's land. That was their idea, that they're caretakers of God's land. What did God tell Adam in the garden? Take care and nourish my land. My ground, not theirs. No Indian ever claimed a piece of ground to be his. The ground might claim him, but he sure didn't claim the ground. The government and the Sioux Nation, the Lakota Nation, are still fighting over the Black Hills. The Lakota says, we are not going to sell the land. We belong to the land. And they said, we'll give you so many $1 million for it. They said, no, we don't want your money. Leave our land alone. Give our land back to us. We never gave it to you. We never sold it. We never traded for it. Nobody, you made somebody a prince among us that wasn't a prince. He couldn't sign it. All right. So there you have. That's the history of that. But as you see this in the population in America today, the greatest, there's a book called Indian Givers, of what the American Indians gave to the whole world, all the food and things that were given, and the governments that were established. You know that the idea of this freedom and democracy here in America spread all over Europe, and it affected the whole world. That idea affected the whole world. What was established over here in this country, and the influence of the Iroquois nation on the American people when they cried independence in the 1770s. And that would have never happened if it hadn't been for the influence of those people on William Penn, Thomas Jefferson, James Mason, George Washington, and all of those people. Now, as the colonies came into the dark backwoods of America, they carried little churches with them. Little missionaries went in there. People would only go sometimes once a month to a church service. They had quarter-time pastors. Ever heard that term? Quarter-time pastors. You pastored 4 churches, and you went into an area that was like Daniel Boone, like Abraham Lincoln area, and they went out into an area and they preached to those people. And you spent one Sunday a month there in that area. And these people would come together. They would have a camp meeting, and you would preach all day long. They wanted a 4-hour sermon. They didn't probably want a cracker sermon. It's a few little words. They wanted to be uplifted and entrenched in the Word of God. I'd have done all right back then. Long winded as I am. But that's the way it was. And these little associations and people, and they were independent, and some of these Baptists in different areas and whatever they were, they had the circuit riding Methodists. Remember? The Methodist preachers riding around on the mule, going different places. Where did the Methodist Church come from, by the way? John and Charles Wesley established the Methodist Church. And it was named because they had a method of study of God's Word. Where did they come from? England, the Church of England. They kind of come out trying to reform the Church of England and have their idea of religion with their method of study. And we have the Methodists going all day. We're really strong over here in America. And they were out in these little areas going out preaching. And by the way, Methodists and Baptists have been debating each other forever. All down to they would have debates. They didn't have radio. They didn't have television. And when they had if somebody would come to town and just recite the 23rd Psalm, everybody in town would come and listen to it. And if you had a Baptist and a Methodist, or a Baptist and a Presbyterian, or whatever, And you could go hear two people get up and talk for 5 hours and bat each other over the head verbally for a whole week or 2 weeks at a time. That was the greatest thing. That was entertainment. And learning, too. In the early days in America, some of the only things that you learned, what you studied out of was McGuffey's Readers. I started to bring them. And it was all set up on biblical truths and biblical morality and standards. That's how the people were. They were trained to be honest. We have a whole different generation in America today. People are trained to be cutthroats and liars. You're told to lie. And you can't make it in business unless you're a better liar than the next guy. And as a salesman and a lawyer. Think about that. Salesmen and lawyers are one and the same, basically, a lot. Lawyers are standing up saying they're lying in court as fast as they can open their mouth and shut it, trying to sell the judge to believe what they have on their side, whether it's truth or not. They're not sworn to tell the truth at all. Not sworn to tell the truth. What they put forth is not true. And a salesman. When I worked at Ace Hydraulic, I was the shop foreman over there. And we had two of them. We had a pump shop foreman and a shop foreman. I was the pump shop foreman and the shop foreman assistant because it was such a big area that we had to have two foremen. But basically, I did both jobs. The salesman would go out in the field and they'd say that we can do this job in 24 hours. You just get that job over here. So they bring it in and say we can get out in 24 hours. I said, don't think so. Who told you that? And I said, there's no way we can do it. We're going to have to wait 2 weeks for the parts to get here because they're going to have to make this and do this and do that. I said, what? I said, well, that's the way it is now. I'm trying to be honest with you because I don't want you to be caught unawares. And sometimes they take the job someplace else and then they kept bringing it back because they were going to do the same thing. They tell them we can do it and then the same thing happened over there. They jumped on me right and left, told me to start learning how to lie and cover for those salesmen. And then the customers would come in and they didn't want to talk to anybody but Jim Phillips. And he wouldn't believe anybody else. If they came and talked to me, I'd tell them the truth. And that was really causing a problem. And I'd butt heads with the salesman and everything else. And I say, you know what? I said, I think we can be very honest and still have a real good business. And you know what I base that on? The Word of God. You know, when your customers know where you're coming from, if you tell them it's going to be a week, then it's impossible. And they know you're being honest with them, and if you do the best you can for them, they will come back. And they'll let you do the job. They really will. Honesty, that's a scientific fact of the Bible. Would you like, when you go down to buy a new car, Brother Rock, you want them to lie to you? Or a couch or whatever it is, they tell you the best thing and show you all these things and lying to you? Telling you can have it tomorrow and then you can't have the car for 3 weeks? They didn't even have one. They showed you one that's somebody else's car or whatever. Honesty. Baptists have been fighting for that throughout the ages. They said so many times in history, we won't swear by God or anything else. We're just going to say yes. Just like Jesus said, your yes is a yes and your no is a no, and that's good enough. And your word ought to be good enough. So many years have come and gone since the Paulicians and the Waldenses, and these people have died and gone on, but they left their print on society. They were an honest, pure people. The early Baptists were called Puritans. Why were they called Puritans? Why were they called the Albigenses? So Puritans meant that they lived a truthful life. They were honest and they worked hard. The Albigenses means that they were white people or pure people. That was from Albi, France. The Albigenses, the white people, the pure people. the Snow White people. You go back in Pennsylvania and different areas back there, and you will see Amish. Amish are Anabaptists, really. They, sometimes in some ways, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves and become those people again, because our people were part of that at one time. That's what kept us close to the Bible. Now, they have strayed from it in some areas, and we have strayed from it in others. Okay, as we are today. The Mennonites of old. They live a life that is very honest. They want to be separate from the world. So many times when we preach weddings, we say, be not yoked together with unbelievers. Do you know what the context of that message to the Corinthians was? It wasn't talking about marriage. What was it talking about? When you're yoked together, what are you doing? Working. Don't work with unbelievers. Boy, how much that would jar up our life if we had to work with a bunch of unbelieving, ungodly buzzards, or else go without a job. Boy, the Amish took it serious. So they separate themselves from the world. And everybody knows that if you buy a piece of furniture that's Amish made, or a harness, or whatever, you got the best there is. Made out of the best leather, out of the best cloth. There's less flaws in it than anything else. They're honest people. This is the heritage that we brought down to our people. These little colonies that were established in America, these little associations will come out. Only got just a few minutes left. Try to cover some of the associations, some of the names among Baptist people. Southern Baptist. That's what we are here in this church. We're Southern Baptist. Why are we called Southern Baptist? For one thing, we're not Northern Baptist. All right, simple as that. The reason for the term Southern Baptist is that we were of the South. Now, we don't want to fight the Civil War all over again. But the Civil War was not over slavery. The Civil War was over states' rights. The sovereign right of the state to say what they could do in their area. When the South lost the war, America went downhill ever since then. That's an absolute fact in history. Freedom was lost. Slavery would have ended. And let me tell you something else on top of that. Out here in California, they were selling Indian slaves at public auction in Los Angeles as late as 1869. The Civil War was over in 1865. So slavery was not the issue, was it? In the North, how many of you ever heard someone that old Tennessee Ernie Ford used to talk about the coal miner, 16 tons, and another a day older and another deeper in debt, and he's in debt to the public, the company store. In the North and in the South, in some areas down in, the Northeast, that is, in those coal mining communities and everything was owned by the big companies. And you were simply a slave, and they gave you so little money that you could never leave. And your children, the reason why Southern Baptists started Sunday school was to get those children out of those factories in the North. Up in those areas, they had influence, and finally, we just totally split from the North. But we were causing problems up there in the North with a great big business. Because we were educating children how to read and write so they could leave the factories. A child went to work as a slave in a factory the time he was 5 years old and never saw anything else but that. Never had any other chance in life. And we said, let's have Sunday schools on Sunday. Let them have Sunday off so they can learn how to read and write. And of course, what did we teach them? The Bible. All right? Our churches stood on the side of the South all during the Civil War. The atrocities that was... You don't hear that, and you don't hear what I'm telling you. You're not going to hear it. The atrocities of the North, what they had done to the American people. They took people's lands, totally devastated, even in areas that were not even participating in the Civil War. They went in there and they would completely devastate farms, everything. Yes, sir.
So, in your opinion, do you think Abraham Lincoln should have let the South secede from the Union and just let them
There was a
become
problem.
a separate country? And
No. What that was a protest, wasn't it? There was a protest. Leave us alone. Let us do our own thing. We have freedom in this country. All right? We've had civil war all the time. You know, that was our civil war here. But it was not over slavery. It was over states' rights. Now, let me tell you some things that you don't know about that happened after that. Remember when you heard of the carpetbaggers going into the South from the North?
Mm-hmm.
And going in established, there were sheriffs from Nottingham. They were going in there, devastating areas. And my family was part of it in those areas. We were Indians. You know, we basically didn't fight the Civil War or anything like that. That was not part of our country. But they went in and they started taking our lands from us and putting it up for white lottery and moving people out of the North down into the South to take control of the South. Okay? They would take people from the North, criminals, basically, and set them down there over certain areas, and you make sure that they don't have any revolution down there again. And they would establish it. The Negroes that were turned loose on the plantations, some of the Negroes didn't want to leave. They had it good. A lot better than they had it in some of the areas in the North where that was still going on, and why we were still, and the practice of Sunday school was still going on up in there. But they took the Negroes off of the farms in the South and took them and put them in Indian territory. Now, the American government had established a treaty with the American Indian people that said that they would give them so much money a year. They put the Indian people on welfare, basically, what they did. They made them a ward of the state. And they took and took them out of their native lands. The Cherokees didn't come from Oklahoma, all right? My people, I'm half Cherokee at least. And we're out of North and South Carolina and Georgia. And they took all of the farms and plantations. You know that the first seminary in the United States of America was established by the Cherokee people? Did you know that? The first college and seminary in America was established by the Cherokee people. And girls could go to it too. We didn't say a girl couldn't go. They could go there. They took those lands over and they moved those Indians into what was called Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma later, into a God-forsaken country that was good for nothing, they thought. They didn't know oil was there. After the oil there, then they went back there and worked somewhere again. But they took the land, and then they took the Negroes and put them on the Indian rolls. Many Negroes today are drawing Indian money that have never been Indian at all. But they didn't want to give them their money and support them, so they gave them Indian money. That was the Indian stupid money in that area. Talk about a messed up mess. But that all happened during the Civil War. Did they teach you that in school? And many of those people on those rolls, if you look on the Chickasaw rolls, if you look on the Creek rolls, you'll see the person on the rolls is called a freedman. And that's where you hear the word freeman and freedman. Those were the terms that they gave to those freed men that were freed from slavery, and they put them back in there, and they gave them 160 acres or whatever in Oklahoma, and they gave them the annuities and royalties that were due the Indian tribes in those areas. And they put a lot of them among the Creek Nation, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and whatever. And that's why some of those Indians became very dark complexion later, because they intermarried with them during that time, because they were put in there all together. The early Baptist churches even went into those areas. The government paid, the United States government paid for Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholics to go into areas and missionize these Indian areas, these Indian schools, what they call Indian schools, which were nothing but prisons. I said a couple of weeks ago that I'm glad that the Baptists didn't have anything to do with it. We never took money from the government to go and missionize. And now we have another type similar thing today where it talks about going and doing what this thing with Bush, giving money to churches where they go and do public services and everything. Baptists never took part of that in the past at all, in those areas of the Indian schools when they went into the areas. The early associations and the names for Baptists, I talked about the separate Baptists in America, where George Whitefield went in and established churches. He was a congregational preacher, had basically come from England. He was a great, fantastic, fiery preacher. He went in, and the Baptists here in America were called just basically Baptists, or General Baptists, or regular Baptists in America. They finally began known as regular Baptists and separate Baptists. The separate Baptists were lining up with George Whitefield, and they were allowing him to preach. That was called the affiliation. Baptists didn't stand for that back in the past. And they went in and established it. Finally, there was we had the Southern Baptist Convention, and then you had different little groups all over the place. The separate and the regular Baptists argued for years. Finally, they decided to bury the hatchet, so to speak, and became known as United Baptists. And there were many, many United Baptist conventions all the way through America, all through the East and the Midwest. And finally, they even came out to California during the Depression. California is a very young state where it comes from Baptist. California was Catholic. It was a hard field when they came out here. If it wasn't for the Dust Bowl and the persecution of the Indian people that drove us out here, there wouldn't be any Baptists in California today. They'd be all Catholics still out here. There aren't many old Baptist churches in California. You can just about trace every one of them in California back to the 20th century, after the Dust Bowl or just prior to it. And we're part of that unit of the Southern Baptists and the United Baptists coming to California. Down through those periods of time, there was the Southern Baptist Convention, the American Baptist Convention, the ABA was started in, I believe, 1925, made up of United Baptists. And the United Baptists were from the separate and the regular Baptists. But remember, there was some bad baptism that came in with that separate Baptist group because of George Whitefield. He really wasn't a Baptist. He was a Calvinist preacher that preached he was a congregational Calvinist, so to speak. And he went in, and John and Charles Wesley were his friends. They were opposite poles as far as ideas. The Methodists are what? Arminians, works for salvation. The Baptists are Calvinists in idea and salvation by grace, and so is the Presbyterian churches. Well, he established a lot of churches that were separate Baptist churches. Finally, those separate and regular Baptist churches united in what was called unity churches, Unity Baptist churches, are United Baptist churches. Some of those churches in the regular Baptist churches were very Calvinistic in their view, and that's what we call the Primitive Baptists. Remember when we called the Primitive Baptists? What did the Primitive Baptists preach? They were very, very hard-shell. They're the hard-shell Baptists. They preached that a person didn't have anything to do with his salvation at all, or the calling of God or anything, that God decided in eternity past who would be saved and lost. And if you're in the world today, and they believed and they were strong 5-point Calvinists, two of them: total hereditary depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. They believed absolutely in irresistible grace, and they would not send one single solitary missionary out, because they said it's futile, it's stupid. If God is omnipotent, He is going to get those that are going to be saved into a church out someplace if He has to take them from across America or the Black Forest or wherever to get them saved. Those that are going to be saved are going to be saved no matter what. So don't send out missionaries. Well, other churches A lot of Southern Baptist churches at one time, J.R. Graves and A.T. Robertson, a lot of the churches that they were associated with called themselves missionary Baptist churches. A lot of J.R. Graves followers call themselves landmark missionary Baptist churches. Why did they call themselves landmark missionary Baptist churches? Now, a lot of those were Southern Baptist churches, now remember. They were all part of the convention at that time. Some of them different other little associations. They all exchanged letters for many, many years. Well, if you were a Calvinist, a strong primitive Baptist, so-called, super Calvinist, hyper Calvinist, and you didn't believe in missions, what do you think the missionary Baptists believed in? Missions. That's the reason why they put missionary Baptists on their name. All right. They believed in the universal call of all mankind, and they believed in sending out missionaries. Okay? And the Southern Baptist Convention was part of it. The Southern Baptist whole slogan was to reach the world with the truth of the gospel. So they were missionary Baptists too, weren't they? All right. The word landmark came from J.R. Graves' old book called Landmarkism, What Is It? That he wrote. And it rumbled through Southern Baptist ranks for it's still rumbling through Southern Baptist ranks. What it teaches, what he taught, is basically what I taught you in this classroom. That God founded His churches, and that those churches would come down through all ages. That we are not Protestants, that we are Baptists. And Baptism predates Protestantism by about 1,500 years. They taught, and he taught, that every church was a democracy, that it could not be ruled over or oversaw by any bishop, so-called, by any large, like the Church of England. There are no such thing as cardinals and bishops that look over churches in different areas. They taught that each church was an independent Baptist church throughout the lands, that we answer to no other church, only to Christ. And now that's where you are today. Do you have any questions? Or I turn you loose for the whole year on 6 months or so, or 4 months on Baptist history. Any questions? Do you have any? Are you foggy on any areas in there? I've tried to cover some of it, so you'll understand just a little bit about these things. Brother Rock, do you have any questions? Brother? No? Marilyn, do you have any questions?
No.
You can ask me at home.
I usually have a question on the way home.
She'll ask me on the way home all the time.
You guys been through it live, okay?
Yes, sir.
Community program.
All right.
And they'll think the spotlight is on them.
Okay.
So this is the last class.
This is the last class. I will be teaching some more classes, probably starting with Sunday night, on the cults and isms, where the cults began and everything. And I decided not to do that now in this 16 weeks because I wanted to cover really church history from a Baptist point of view more than what I did the last time. And I think I did that. Did you learn more this time from it than maybe? Sometimes there's a time element in learning it anyway. If you took the class 3 times in a row, you'd learn something every time. I took it about 5 or 6 times and taught it a lot for 15, 20 years, I guess.
So that will be in the fall?
Well, no, the cults is going to start next Sunday night. If they don't let me have a room for the next 2 or 3 weeks, this room, I'll continue to do that. Mm-hmm. All right? God bless you. And, Brother, would you dismiss us in prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for your word and your truth.